This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warnshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. It's all good in the neighborhood. NBA Conference Finals. Baseline boys always got them storylines to discuss. It's basketball, baby. It's what we're about. You know what I'm saying? It's what the show thrives on. It's what your ears thrive for, right? So we always enjoy the opportunity and the time to be able to bring up some really good stuff that's happening in the association. At the same time, also get you geeked up and ready to go with regards to the NBA Finals, which is on the horizon, you know, with the way things are trending. And you know, again, man, as we come towards the culmination of what's been a hellacious and just furious NBA season, you know, you kind of blink, and the next thing you know, we're already talking about, you know, what's on the horizon for the upcoming season, and that's what makes it so exciting. It's just, you know, nonstop, and you just got to basically keep your head on a swivel. So, as always, man, you can't do it by yourself. You always got to do it with a team. And I can't probably think of a better PNC to roll with that's been doing this with me for so long. My right-hand man, my brother, partner in crime, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, Mr. Shaw? Man, got to tell you, this NBA playoff has left us with some emotional highs and some, you know what I'm saying? Some, how do you say, you want to just kind of like you blow your top off? It's just you want to crack something, you want to smash something. That's, you know, so
I'll say this: if you've seen the NBA, they've done a great job, I think, marketing the finals, the upcoming finals here as we record. And there's this great commercial out that it's like, you talk about the highs and lows, roller coaster, you get the sweats, you get stressed out, then you realize it was only just one game. And I feel like that's been very much that. I think everybody lives and dies almost with every single shot, every single turnover, and when the games are of this magnitude right now, even in the conference finals. So I definitely have appreciated the NBA basketball that we've seen thus far. The conference finals in some ways are not necessarily going according to plan, I think, in terms of the overall competitiveness of it. But that's the story for another time, and, we might have two new teams to jump up on the slab here when we get to the autopsy, but we might be getting to that a little sooner than we thought to. But in the meantime, we got some other things to discuss here on the baseline this week.
totally. The one thing I will say, Shaw, and I probably, we didn't really allude to this when we did our conference finals preview, but it's something that I've seen over the course, of the 4 games that have already been played as we're recording this show. You probably couldn't have picked 4 better teams who emulate what momentum really means in the playoffs, right? You look at the Heat, the Celtics, the Nuggets, and the Lakers, and both of these teams, to their credit, I'm not saying this because I think that they're just, lucky or whatever. To their credit, have been the type of team that when they find lightning or they strike lightning in a bottle or capture lightning in a bottle, they ride that thing literally until the wheels fall off. And it's funny because it's that same momentum, that mentality of how they ride that momentum has also been what's put them in the precarious positions that they've been in to get them to this point, and for us to even at times question whether or not they're good enough to win it all. But that's why they're here. And I don't think I've ever said that before about all 4 teams, right? Like typically when you have that conversation, you look at a team top to bottom, arguably one of the best teams, probably got one of the best players who's doing his thing. Nobody can stop him. We're saying all of the right things about this, but in each and every single one of these teams, even with some great players and some great role players and things of that nature, there's still like this little thing called Lady Luck or this thing called momentum that is driving these teams to swing the direction of a game, possibly the series. And it just comes down to, I feel like, Shaw, it's going to come down to which one is going to ride it through and through. It looks like it could be the Nuggets, looks like it could be the Heat, but I'm just saying it's interesting because even as we're speaking about this, there's not four better teams that can change that narrative very quickly than the matchups that we're seeing in this conference finals.
Yeah, well, I'll stick to the Heat and the Lakers specifically, and the Lakers might be running out of gas here as we record, unfortunately. But Miami is very much riding what many thought was just the bubble wave, a few seasons ago, and have figured out a way to capture and just continue to ride that all the way, potentially even to the NBA Finals. There's nothing like when a team is just clicking at the right time. Like there's really nothing like it because in the playoffs, it's in the NBA playoffs, it's often kind of a stranger thing because you can't get hot and make like a tournament type run like you can in college. So to see it at this level where you really have to sustain that level through the course of multiple series with matchups and adjustments being made against you, I think is really kudos to me specifically Miami and the Lakers who have gotten to this point. Denver and Boston came in as favorites, roughly in both of their conferences. So I'm not as maybe not going to give as much praise to them, but Denver, I think, has probably been the most disrespected team of any of the higher seeds in the playoffs. And you see them doing what they need to do right now in the Western Conference.
Yeah, agreed. Let me put it like this. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying that if you look at the way that the Celtics have had to get to this point to the conference finals, one would tell you that they have been, walking a fine line, whether or not it's, they should be good enough or should have been good enough to get past the requisite teams that they played against. I'm just saying that even at that time frame, it literally took something of a momentum shifter, a change of some sort, a game that they probably should have lost that they wind up winning. And it just completely shifted the narrative about whether or not this team is going to figure out a way to pull through. And what I'm just alluding to is that I see that within all four of these teams, which is something that I rarely ever do see simply because of the fact that they all have gotten to this point in a different way, shape, or form. Defying some of these odds in some sort of way. So
Sure.
that's just me, feeling my pie in the sky self or whatever. That's how that is. Either way you look at it, though, it's still great and exciting NBA for you guys to be watching, and that's what we're hoping that you guys are doing is checking out the conference finals. And you obviously don't want to miss out when we actually get ready to do the Cover the Baseline NBA Finals preview. And that obviously means that two of those teams that we were talking of before are going to be the last ones vying for that opportunity to win a championship. And then we got two more teams who will be welcomed ever so graciously to the slab for our coveted autopsy reports. This week's show, Shaw, great show on tap. We got some stuff that we need to talk about with regards to the NBA draft lottery. We'll be talking about Blazers. Is there a market for DeAndre Ayton? Well, I don't know. Shaw probably thinks so. I'm just wondering. Maybe not. But we got a lot of news and notes that we're going to kind of cover it. And then basically based off of what's been going on with this not just the finals, but just in general, the trend and what's in the atmosphere, we're going to kind of dig in on the relevancy of coaching and how that is being valued in the playoffs specifically. Is this foreshadowing of how expendable the role of the position can truly be? And Shaw and I, we had this conversation before we jumped on doing this podcast, and I think it was one that we said, hey, let's expound on it a little bit more. So in our topic of the breakdown, we're going to be talking about coaching in the playoffs and how the relevancy of that is impacting not just what you're seeing, but maybe might be a precursor to what the future may look like as far as what you're looking for in the type of head coach that you want, moving your organization, moving your team forward. So good stuff all around. And as always, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at Game Face Lee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. Be sure to check us out at www.thebaselinenba.com. That's the home where you can catch our show. You can also see us rocking with the 19 Media Group. So for those of y'all watching us, if you see the nice little blue and white logo down in the corner, that's 19 Media Group. 19 Media Group be running these content streets. So be sure to go to www.19mediagroup.com to check out our show and the family of great shows with a great list of content for your listening pleasures across the gamut: music, entertainment, culture, sports. You want it, they can give it to you. Go to www.19mediagroup.com. All right, Shaw. So let's get right into some of these news and notes, right? That's happening in the association. Um, First on the agenda, big win for the San Antonio Spurs. They wind up winning the NBA draft lottery. Let it not be said, man, that you know, I guess the fun part about the lottery is the mannerisms and the um emotions that that tend to come out when the executive or whoever the ambassador is, for that particular team, if they wind up getting the number one pick. So it's kind of weird seeing like the Spurs, because that's just so not Spurs, right? Like if it was Greg Popovich up there, you probably would have said something very, smart alecky, or whatever. It would have had just a wry smile or whatever, but not the executives, man. They were full on that, letting you know
Yeah.
this is ours.
Yeah, he was all Matthew McConaughey and super excited to get out there, all these yes and fist pumps and the whole nine. From my perspective, it was a little anticlimactic only in the aspect of I think I didn't I didn't necessarily want from a basketball excitement standpoint, but for Wemby to end up in San Antonio. But at the end of the day, this is the right basketball fit, I think, for his development. And we might be looking at the next great San Antonio big man here as a result of the Spurs lucking into it. They are the all-time best team in tanking. When
I,
they've tanked, it has always worked to their favor. And kind of shout out to San Antonio Spurs, and Wemby is they're going to be the Spurs building block here for quite some time, and probably keep Popovich on the sidelines a little bit longer than maybe we were anticipating maybe a couple weeks ago.
but I got to ask you, the fact that we shipped media to Paris, and listen, big up to Wemby. He said, "Man, I don't need to be there for all of that. Y'all can come find me."
He had
Right?
games. He had a game to play.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, it. If you really think about it, Shaw, with the way that he has been talked about, and warranted, very, very much warranted, the basketball world could literally stop. And they would, you let us know what you want to do, Wemby. But it's just interesting to me, like how the media has went out of its way to be there with the family. And yeah, I, I'm telling you, we've come a long way. The NBA has come a long way in rolling out and introducing us to the future of what they're hoping for is going to be an even more elevated, global presence with Wemby being drafted, even if it's with the San Antonio Spurs. So
Well, I think with something like that, again, he's being overly hyped and heralded. Like this is next level type stuff. I think in the conversation for Wemby, and all I can do is hope that he has the ability to live up to it. And I think sending media to cover him out there in France is not necessarily monumental in some aspect, but I think it just kind of speaks to how well and how good of a player they think he's going to ultimately be. To kind of make these proclamations and dedicate these resources at this early stage. We've seen number one draft picks or highly touted draft picks not attend the draft lottery for various reasons. They don't go to the combine for various reasons, if like their stock can only fall or do whatever the case may be. But this guy's actually out there hooping, like he's still playing the game. So I think it's a very interesting situation there. And I think when Summer League comes around this year in Las Vegas, all eyes are going to be there. I tweeted out point blankly, the Spurs are not going to get cute here. They're not going to, do a Danny Ainge and trade down for the number 3 pick. This is the pick. And this is what's going to happen here. And like I said, shout out to the Spurs for, their luck, and I know some people are really distraught by that for very many reasons. But a good organization gets to have probably a generational type player here, hopefully for them. We'll see what they're able to do with him in the next couple seasons.
I think it's going to be. I think it would be an interesting conversation. Maybe that should be parking lot, topic at some point for us to have, Shaw. about what does the number one pick really mean for some organizations? Like if we went down the list of teams and we said you getting Wemby means what to you, right? And I want to figure out if whether or not this is about a core piece player that is, a cornerstone player or that is the savior player. You know what I'm saying? Like figuring out because I don't think there's a one size fits all situation at times when it comes to the generational players that do come in. I think that the timing of when they come in, motivated by the hype and the momentum that comes in, I really do think plays a role in the level of greatness that we elevate some of these players to be. But I think when you look at the track record of what they've done with other previous players who have been heralded and touted in that way, we often blame the players. We don't necessarily look at what the organizations did or didn't do to put that player in the best position possible for us to see this whole thing through. So it would be an interesting topic, Shaw, to me, because to your point, like you said earlier, the Spurs always win when they have to be lottery, right? They always win the lottery literally because they get production from those players when they wind up getting that number one pick. So it's interesting to see how much hype and belief, to your point, Wemby is going to get from all of this. All right, let's focus our attention on the Portland Trailblazers. Well, obviously, we're not going to be involved in the women. They were a part of the conversation, but ultimately they did not wind up getting the pick. So now the idea is they may be talking about moving their pick so that they can go out and get some help for Damian Lillard. And I guess the bigger question really lies in, Shaw, is that do they truly still obviously believe or are all in the idea that they're going to ride this thing out about Dame's loyalty to trying to compete and win with the Portland Trailblazers?
Yeah, Portland is in a really unique situation here, right? Because they moved up and they didn't move up maybe quite enough. If they could have gotten to that number one pick, I think it becomes a completely different situation. I think they would have tried to pair Dame and Wemby together, but with the potential to draft Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller, I think they're more likely to try to move out of that and see if they can get a generational or whatever another star immediately to pair alongside. There's been not even like stars. I think one of the rumors I just read, was Mikal Bridges. Ironically, they would have traded like number three, and some other pieces, maybe number three and Anthony Simons for Bridges. I think that might be a lot. But in general, like they're trying to make a move because Dame has come out and said he's not here for the rebuilding. Now remember, we've already autopsied the Portland Trailblazers and understand that they've got to figure out what they're going to do with Jeremy Grant. They've got to figure out, if Nurkic is going to be, I mean, he's already signed, they re-signed him, but how long do they want to kind of drill down into keeping him as a core piece to this roster? And really good, how good is Anthony Simons? And I think hearing his name in trade rumors already makes you feel like, well, maybe they don't think he's all that good or he's not that good where he can help Dame get to the level that Dame is trying to get to. So Portland's going to have their name in plenty of rumors. That doesn't mean they get a deal done before the draft, but this Blazers team is going to be very, very busy because Dame's time is on, no pun intended here, but the clock is ticking.
The clock is ticking. Fair enough. It's funny, Shaw, because they gave up CJ McCullough in this idea that they had their McCullough, 2.0, or they had the McCullough replica with Simons, and now they're already ready to move off from Simons. I just begin to wonder, Shaw, like what dynamic is going to be best fit for a guy like Damian Lillard? Should it be where he's paired with, a good two guard, backcourt combination that he's used to playing and been successful with, or front court, like where maybe that pressure is taken off of Nurkic, right?
Yeah, they seem to be looking for a wing. Whatever it is, they're not necessarily interested in the big man situation. There's not too many dynamic bigs out there. So
Right.
if there's a wing that can help them, that's the move that they're gonna go for.
Interesting. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about there's not that many dynamic bigs, right? And DeAndre Ayton, who I think a lot of people have been weighing on his dynamic bigginess because he's just not. He's been a no-show in the playoffs, and in most cases, I think he's been bullied. I don't use that terminology, and I don't want to take that terminology lightly, but it's what it is. I mean, that's what the running rumor is about DeAndre Ayton. Ayton will feel like he'll, tell you otherwise. I just find it interesting, Shaw, that if now what we're talking about is moving on from Ayton after committing all that money to Ayton, what do you think, he's worth now, given what has seen, what he showed you, in this playoff series against Denver Nuggets?
Yeah, I mean, we just autopsied Phoenix, obviously last episode, but I really thought, and I've kind of come around on my thinking some, but initially he was like, well, you trade it in and try to get multiple pieces to fill out the rest of the roster since you just don't have that many bodies on the team. Dallas is just not that interested, according to a report from Mark Stein currently. But that's where they love to try to get, because obviously Dallas is trying to give Luka some help, and they don't know what the status of Kyrie is going to be returning there. So can they give him somebody else to play with? There may be some others that at least sniff around here, but that contract is still hefty. And it's just beginning. So, we've got multiple years that are left on it. But the one thing I will say to this, and that I don't think we really discussed on the autopsy report of it, is, well, Monty Williams was fired, right? We discussed that, but we didn't discuss the impact that might have on DeAndre Ayton. Clearly, Ayton and Williams had an issue, and there might be some bristling of Ayton and some of his teammates, which, that obviously that's still going to be in play because the core guys are still there who's probably bristling against. But Monty Williams and him were oil and water. And if you're bringing in a new coach, can they finally unlock what Ayton is supposed to be? And that might allow Phoenix at least to retain that piece. But again, they still need to fill out the rest of the roster. So that's what makes it probably a little less likely, because he's the one guy, at least in theory, who can go ahead and get you maybe 2 or 3 pieces to come back to your team.
Mm. I mean, I would like to see DeAndre Ayton elsewhere. As much as I think part of that, you know, part of what was taking place may have been more between Ayton and Monty Williams. At the end of the day, it's Chris Paul that's feeding that ball to him, right? Devin Booker is supposed to be feeding that ball to him. And the fact that they had to go out of their way to get Kevin Durant, already, like James Jones already knew, Ayton, Booker, and Paul are not enough. So you get Kevin Durant, and obviously that means that the ball is going to, has to go to Durant, from time to time. Durant is the type of player where he can get you the ball, but even I think in many cases, and I've seen, watched a few games when the Suns played, I don't think Kevin Durant had as nearly much interest in involving or, being on the same page, so to speak, with DeAndre Ayton as much as it was important for him to be on the same page with Devin Booker. And so I just think that, nature's run its course for Ayton and the Phoenix Suns. I think if there's ever a time for us to figure out whether or not he exudes the physicality to play the role of the position, of being a 5, of being a versatile 4 or 5, whatever it is, I just don't know if it's going to be in Phoenix, regardless of whether or not Monty Williams is or isn't there. I just don't think that the players that he's playing with, he is mentally equipped to continue to play for. And it's not going to do him any good, and it's not going to do the Suns any good.
I don't necessarily disagree. I really don't. So I don't think the pairing is magical in any shape or form. But at the same time, you have to get somewhat of a decent return. So do you sell them for pennies on the dollar, call it by addition by subtraction with whatever you get, or do you try to ride it out and hope a new coach can unlock him and then fill in the supplemental pieces in another way? So big off season for the Phoenix Suns here, brother.
It is really big, but I also put this, again, this is where, the focus is going to be on Jones, because you have to prioritize on who you're getting as a coach, because the coach you're getting is going to either have to show the versatility to prioritize that with unlocking Ayton while still satisfying Booker and Durant, which I don't think that they really care whether or not their belief is Ayton needs to get on board with whatever they feel is going on. And so it's a really interesting dilemma, Shaw, because to your point, if we're talking about the Suns ultimately taking a step forward, it has to be with having an established presence in the front court. They've got to have a guy who can rebound. They got a guy, who can block. They have to have a guy who wants to defend. And your arguably your best player to be able to do that with upside is going to be DeAndre Ayton, but it can't be if he's just not engaged or not enamored with playing around those guys. So, it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to lead a little bit into what we're going to talk about a little bit later in regards to coaching and how much of an influence that's going to be. Because to me, Shaw, to your point, that's the expectation that's going to have to happen, is what kind of coach can basically speak to these two very different initiatives. That's going to bring this together for us to identify whether or not the Suns are going to be a championship caliber team. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie, Warren, Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, getting into our news and notes. Couple more before we get into. But as we're doing that, are you looking for the ultimate destination for NBA gear? Look no further than the NBA store. With a huge selection of authentic and high-quality products, including jerseys, hats, and accessories, the NBA store has everything you need to show off your team pride. Plus, with exclusive and limited edition items, you can make your collection truly one of a kind. And with an online presence, you can shop from anywhere in the world. Don't miss out on the latest trends and experiences. Visit the NBA store today by clicking on our affiliate link. If you're listening to us on your favorite audio platform, be sure to check the link in the description of the show. The Baseline is working in affiliation with the NBA store /Fanatics and will be compensated for your patronage by utilizing our link, nbastore.vwz6.net/baseline. That's nbastore.vwz6.net/baseline. And as always, we thank you for your support. Moving things along, Shaw, Golden State has not made a deal yet with Bob Meyers. He is still undecided on whether or not he wants to return to the Warriors. Should the Warriors be in panic mode?
Not panic, but somebody's got to, steer the ship here. And it's just not looking really positive. We're a month away from the NBA draft. You got to figure out what pieces you're bringing back. What are you trying to move out? Bob Myers seems to be just tired from the run, more mentally and than necessarily physically from all of it, obviously. But it's a grind. He may take some time off and then recoup and then figure out what he wants to do next. I'd be surprised if he left and then went to another job immediately. I think if he's going to just probably take a year or so off before he goes on to the next thing. So I think if you're Golden State, you've had this level of success in a dynasty run. Bob Myers has really been at the center of that, kind of pulling the puppet strings, if you will. And obviously Steph Curry is getting it done on the court. But Bob Myers has been the guy to kind of really make things happen, off the court. And this is a big situation. So continue to watch this over here in the next couple of weeks, especially as we inch closer to the NBA draft.
Do you think it's time Steve Kerr might consider the role?
I don't think Kerr wants to do double duty and in any capacity. And I think
that would probably mean that, Kenny Atkinson might wind up wanting to take over as the head coach if Steve Kerr decides to make that transition.
It'd be really interesting to see if Clay and Curry and Draymond are all down for all of that, though. That's a lot of changing moving parts.
No, I understand, but I'm saying, would you want to see that?
Not necessarily. I think if Bob goes, then it might just be time for a change period altogether. And that might just mean it's like, hey, we've had a good run, but we're going to go our separate ways. I think when you're just trying to hold on and salvage, sometimes you can squeeze too tight and the moment misses you and then you hold on and it becomes too late for you to do something else. So Bob, to me, is kind of the first domino, but I don't think the Warriors are going to panic in any capacity. They have a lot of confidence, as well they should. And if he were to walk, they'll probably just retool and try to figure it out. But again, I personally wouldn't feel like that's the move for them. I would say, you know what? Maybe it's time for us to kind of figure out what's next for us as an organization.
Well, I mean, if you think about this, though, it's interesting that Bob Myers is waiting as long as he has to make that type of decision, albeit if you're the Golden State Warriors, I think you probably feel comfortable with that because Bob Myers, to me, is more important than any draft pick that the Golden State Warriors are really worried about getting. They haven't really been ultimately successful with a lot of the picks that they do anyway. I think, obviously, this is going to be dictated by the type of moves that they're going to have to make in the offseason. So if he has to, if they have to milk this thing to the last possible minute, we've seen that the Warriors as an organization is pretty much a machine, and they've got certain people in place that can hold the fort down. But to your point, it is a little concerning that it's come, it's getting this late in the game before one of your core pieces that has put together the championship dynasty that you have is still not on board to say, let's run this back again. And I think if you are the core players, you have to start wondering about, whether or not you have to start making some transitional plans of your own as well, too. with the future in the organization. So, yeah, a lot to consider. Finally, Shaw, the NBA is considering returning to the old East and West format of All-Star. What say you about that? I'm scratching my head because I have no idea why the hell.
All I got is emojis and LOLs. They want to try to bring back competitiveness. They thought they had found the secret sauce. It is not it. And I just don't know. I don't know what the future of All Star is, because I don't want to spend too much time even on the topic, because it's just, we're gonna have it. Everyone's gonna complain about it. The players are only gonna take it so seriously. If you're looking to do this in-season tournament or whatever is going to happen with that, then let that take the place of All-Star potentially. I don't know. At the end of the day, All-Stars obviously lost this luster, and while you're trying to hold on traditions, it might be a fruitless task. But continuing to shift it and fix it and shift and try this and go back to what we had before, I'm a little exhausted, and as I said, all I can do is LOL and give you all the emojis on this one.
Yeah, All-Star should really just stop being a it should no longer be a game. It should basically be a celebration of an accomplishment and achievement. If they, make it a presentation award show, you can make it a concert, make it whatever the hell you want to make it. But don't make it a game, because if it's a game, then you want the game to be competitive. And if the players are not willing to be competitive, then there's no sense in playing the game. It's really a waste of time. You may make some money off of it because you charge people out the wazoo because it's All-Star weekend. And, but ultimately, there's so many other elements to the NBA that I think people don't know about, that you could use that opportunity in that time to really put that front and center. I just, and the idea that you want to go back to this East and West thing, we blame the NBA a lot about this, but Shaw, I blame the players equally. The fact that there is no level of enthusiasm to want to play and compete against each other for this game. I'm just saying, you just tell the NBPA, tell them we don't want it anymore. Okay. Tell them, but obviously they want their bag as well. And that's where I have a problem with all of this, is because the money is so money driven forward, the mentality and the approach. And at times we tend to realize that we do a disservice with that thought process, and we undermine at the end people's enjoyment, the quote unquote entertainment factor of it, because it's still sports and we do it to compete. Us regular people, we play in games, we pay money to play in games and be a part of teams, and we either are a part of it or we're not a part of it, but we go there and we compete. So if guys are not going to take it seriously, then why do we want to take it seriously, whether or not you choose to change the format, not change the format, bring it back, run it back, whatever you want to do with it? It's not what it was, and therefore it can't be what it is.
Well said.
All right, now that I can get off my pulpit. Callie Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA podcast. Coming up, time for us to talk about coaching in the playoffs. How big a deal of it now is it? Is it front and center of the importance of coaching, man? Sean and I had this really great conversation about it. We're going to bring it to the forefront. We want you to be a part of it as well, too. You don't want to miss out here on the Baseline. Time to break it down. The bone gristle. We are back. Callie Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA podcast, and this is the breakdown. Sean and I getting into the nooks and crannies of things that we kind of saw, or it's kind of been brought up to the forefront in regards to this year's NBA playoffs. And it's an interesting topic that we wanted to kind of lead into. Now, I want to make sure I caveat this conversation, Shaw. This under no means is us targeting any one coach, but I will say that the fact that Joe Mazzulla's name is being, aired out a lot, especially in this Eastern Conference Finals, is speaking to a bigger narrative to why we're having this conversation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you have the better team, there's expectations that when that team fails to meet said expectations, that, well, the blame has to lie somewhere. And the iteration of this conversation is, as you alluded to, our conversation about the Boston Celtics into the Eastern Conference Finals, and whether or not Mazzulla was going to be just lapped by our exposure when it came to the coaching acumen, so to speak. In the Western Conference, you have a guy, Darvin Ham, who is, his first year coach, but he also doesn't have the better team or the perceived better team in the series. But again, the iteration comes from kind of that, like you said, that conversation, but it is something that have been taking a look at throughout the course of the NBA playoffs in general. And hence we are where we are, because we've seen Monty Williams, we've seen Doc Rivers, we've seen Coach Bud also all let go here. And at some point, you made a very, very strong point that I've reflected on, and hence where we're gonna have some conversations. Like, hey, well, when is it on the players? When is it, on the coaches? When is it on the front office? When is it just truly a combination of all of those things? Or when do you just get lapped, and just run by a better team? And I think what ends up happening is we are very, very quick to lay the blame at one person's, and it's always a coach who is always has to be front and center when it comes to any type of lack of perceived success. And I think that's why we're going to have this conversation here and drill down into it too, because I think every time it should be, but it's not. It should be a case by case scenario.
Yeah, I am all completely on board with you on that. And so one of the things that I think was important in the point that I was emphasizing with you when we had this off-air conversation, Shaw, was the fact that, Joe Mazzulla, while he was a part of the team from last year, I don't know how much of an imprint, a voice he truly had, because it was so dominated by Ime Udoka's imprint on this basketball team. Somewhere along the lines, though, once it was revealed that Udoka would no longer be the head coach, I said to myself, it's like, where are we going to be able to see the difference, say, in Mazzulla's way of coaching these guys in comparison to what we would have seen, or what we were seeing from how these guys played under Udoka. And it's been Jekyll and Hyde with Mazzulla. Like, there are times where it looks like he's pro player, and then there are times where he obviously is very much wanting to be pro coach. And I don't know if he's still trying to find his voice. But I saw a very distinct difference as well, too, Shaw, when I see the Nuggets take on the Los Angeles Lakers. I look at Darvin Ham, and I can see that Darvin Ham is really relying on LeBron James and Anthony Davis to really be a voice to those role players who they are going to heavily need if they have any hopes for them to be able to win this series against the Denver Nuggets. And then I see completely the opposite. You can clearly tell that Mike Malone has the ears, the minds, and the hearts of every single one of those players, that they are all responding to Malone. Whatever he's saying in the timeouts, whatever he's saying before the game starts, before tip, and what he's even saying in the post-game conferences. Somewhere you can tell that Mike Malone is very comfortable speaking his truth to those players, because you don't ever hear any of those players saying anything differently. And they're all on board because they believe that their coach is putting them in the best position possible for them to go out and execute, to the point where even when they recognize that they're not executing, which again, it's such a contrast in us believing on whether or not you should be pro player or pro coach, whatever it is, but you got to find the right balance. At times, your imprint has to be on this game if it's going to be down to the wire, critical minutes, certain situations, X's and O's, all of that stuff gets totally thrown to the side. But somewhere along the lines, guys like Mike Malone and Eric Spoelstra figure out a way to really have an imprint on what we're seeing so far in the conference finals, and it's elevating the conversation about whether or not younger coaches are going to have a shorter leash if you've got really talented players, but you don't know how to get these guys to buy into what it is you want to see them doing when they're out there on the basketball court.
Couple of points there that I want to get to, and also, if you're a Denver Nuggets fan, please forgive us. He likes to be called Michael. He does not like Mike anymore, so we have to address him by his what he wants to be called, Michael Malone. And the other side of this, though, there's a lot of value in continuity. We look at Miami specifically. Spoelstra's been there since forever now, it seems, and even Malone has been there for a certain level of time where they could have said, "Hey, you know what? We're going to move on because you didn't succeed this year." Every team and organization seems to be on trying to find what's shiny and new. And this new person is going to come here and unlock instead of allowing coaches to build and build and build. I have a couple of points. I'm going to try to hit them really quickly. In Boston's situation specifically, not only did they lose Udoka, but they lost Will Hardy, and Damon Stoudemire also left in the middle of the season. So even the support staff around Mazzulla is now different than it probably should be, and they did nothing to back that up. And so he's left, and that's not to say that the guys that are there are not competent, but it clearly was a collective group that helped make Boston be what they were last year. And you're seeing some of the signs of not having that collectiveness here on the sidelines, and it comes to execution rear its ugly head, specifically here in the Eastern Conference now. But to your earlier point, when it comes to when the players need to step up, so this is where you and I may disagree, but I think it really is a subjective matter.
Right.
If I'm ex-coach, I have to take stock of my team and my organization. And I'll caveat it by saying this. Sometimes you have to let the players grow. They have to figure it out. They have to get better. There are times where that is. But in the playoffs, if you truly know your guys, you know whether or not they have it or they don't have it. And when it comes now to being at the highest stage, do they have it, or do they need you to step in here now as the leader of these men to figure out a way to try to help them execute? Now, if they go out there and fall on their face, and we've said, even in the Bucks series, Bud didn't go out there and miss those free throws. And, with Doc Rivers, he didn't force James Harden to make those turnovers and whatever the case may be. Players still need to execute, but they need a game plan to try to execute. Right. And I think what ends up happening a lot of times is we want to just trust the players and say, hey, go figure it out. You are an all NBA player. And then maybe I understand the reason and the want to give into that as an all NBA player. And we'll talk specifically about Tatum and Brown here, but they're not the type of just go get it done execution. They don't have the bag off the dribble to kind of go and create in the way that Kevin Durant does, in the way Kyrie Irving does, even in the way that LeBron can just truck his way to the lane if that's what he wants to do. So you've got to figure out a way to put them in the spaces and spots that make them ultimately successful. And I think that's where younger coaches and maybe some coaches who are just not that good lack and don't get the most out of the talent that sometimes we all would consider to be elite. But players have a job to effing do, and they don't always do it.
Yeah, so you bring up some excellent points. And I think part of that is where you're saying that I disagree with you because I'm putting more the onus on the players. I think part of it, Shaw, is when you are a team that sees another team who has either figured you out or has put you in a tenable position, right? If you've been doing this now 5 of the last 7 years where you're playing at one of the highest levels, getting to the playoffs, you're playing at one of the highest levels because ultimately you are among the last 8 teams, right? Really in this particular case, you're last of the 4 teams. We're talking about conference finals. You're last of the 4 teams with an opportunity to get to the NBA finals. Okay. So everything that you're doing is heightened to such scrutiny. And after a while, it's easy that that the head coach is going to be scrutinized because the perception to what you're saying is that they need to know if you've got it or you don't got it. But at some point, if you've been doing this now, like over the course of 7 years, you have to have it, right? Like we cannot be having these kind of conversations about you being an all NBA, an all-star, and always picking your team to be among one of the top teams in the NBA if we didn't believe that you have it, right? Now, maybe you don't have it at that second, at that moment, but through the course of a series, you got to know that you have it. And I think, to your point, Shaw, I gave too much credit to the players in thinking that if you've been doing this now, this is not your first time coming to the conference finals. It's not your first time playing to get to the NBA finals. That you still have to rely on another voice to put you in a place where even to the rest of the team, who may not even look the same as what you've had a couple of years ago, to the rest of that team, they're looking at you because they know you've been there. They know you've absorbed either the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. and that you can help guide them. And I think that's a component that's always going to be there, Shaw. Like, we compete in sports, not to the level as the Tatums and the Browns or the Jimmy Butlers, but we compete. And at times you're sitting next to a guy who probably has never played or has never played on your team, never played with you, never seen how you operate, see when you go up there and you hit a home run or you strike out or you shoot a three or you're airballing stuff. They don't see it, they don't know, but they're going to look at you and they're going to see how you respond, right? How you interact, how you come to them and speak to them and give them insight or whatever the case may be. And I think that to me is more what I was alluding to when I talk about the players having more of an imprint on this because of the experiences that they've already had, even through the courses of coaches. Tatum and Brown have been through Stevens, Udoka, and now Mazzulla, right? So at one point, that equation can change again. It doesn't change. It shouldn't change them. And I think without them, that part of it is going to always be the outlier in us recognizing whether or not they will ever win an NBA championship. Because at some point, they need to be putting this together rather than waiting for someone else to tell them that they need to put it together.
Well, I don't want to. I'll say only this because I don't want to focus, on the Celtics overly. So I just think it's funny. I'm picking on you. So let me say that too, because you're saying have to, and I think nobody has to have anything. I think either they do or they don't. Now, what we expect, as media members and of consumers of the game, we might expect, because you all are an all NBA talent, because you are AKA air quote the best player on the team, you are humbly one of the best players on the planet, then figuring these things out should be second nature. And I think Tatum specifically got a lot of credit in game 7. It's like, hey, he figured out Philadelphia or whatever the case may be. And it's like, hey, he got hot. I don't know how much was elite level skill in that, so to speak. Because like, he got hot, carried the momentum, and it seemed to work. But execution, I think, wasn't the order of the day. So let's flip it over to Milwaukee in some aspect, right? Giannis has reached the mountaintop. How were the Bucks able to turn that Phoenix series around? Giannis more or less played the 5 and was more or less playing with his back to the basket, as opposed to dribbling into defense where he got walled off. And we saw how that worked for him, ironically, against Miami in the bubble. So why did that not become Giannis's move, or more or less how the Milwaukee Bucks played the entirety of the playoff series? Instead of him trying to go up against set defenses and running into people. Yes, he was injured in the whole 9, but there are issues there. If I take stock of the entirety of the league, right, there are only a handful of players where I say I trust them to just figure it out. I think even of the upper echelon teams here, they need the coach's touch, if you will. Whoever that coach is, they need that coach's touch in this to kind of help them get there. Memphis has all the talent in the world. But do you think they can, John Moran and Desmond Bain and, well, not Dylan Brooks now, but whoever's left over will be able to just figure it out? Or does Taylor Jenkins need to craft offense for them? Sacramento's success this year, yes, Sabonis and Fox were amazing, but Mike Brown had his imprint on that team, and he extracted every last aspect of talent that he possibly could out of that in that situation. Cleveland Cavaliers, hey, I like JB and everything like that too, but that's not a team that can just figure it out. They need to figure out ways to execute in a better situation. So to me, that's where it's like, you can't, like, and Donovan Mitchell has been a guy who's been at the highest stages, and yeah, he can get hot and maybe he carries you, but coaching and again, it really is team by team. Coaching really does matter. In a way that I don't know how much we want to just say the players need to have a better level of understanding because they have the requisite experience. And that's all. I think that's where I'm kind of not necessarily disagreeing with you, but where I said my counterpoint to it is, I think it's just so subjective. Just because I've been someplace 5 times doesn't mean that I really understand what it means to be in that moment.
Fair point, Shaw. Fair points. Let me come back to your point. Obviously we got to pay some bills. So I want you to kind of put that on a marker. You mentioned something that I found, very interesting. I don't want to lose that point. Callie Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA podcast. Keep us locked as we're going to continue our conversation on the breakdown. Are you tired of placing bets alone and not having anyone to talk about those predictions? Do you want to connect with other sports bettors and share your winning strategies? Then look no further than the Sharps Sports Social Network for the sports bettors. With Sharps, you can connect with your friends so you can see what they're betting on and even interact with their bets. The iOS app connects to all major sports books and daily fantasy platforms like DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, Prize Picks, and Underdog. And here's the best part. If you download Sharps now and use the promo code DB286, you'll receive access to the community to start showing off your betting chops and an opportunity to compare your bets with us. So what are you waiting for? Download Sharps today. Use our promo code DB286 and start connecting with other sports bettors. Don't forget to share your winning strategies and interact with other users' bets. Join the social network for sports bettors and take your betting game to the next level. Stick your head out. Callie Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA podcast. More on the breakdown here on the Baseline. We are back. Callie Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA podcast. And our topic of the breakdown is the importance of coaching, especially the imprint it has on the NBA playoffs, especially for this year's NBA playoffs. And you brought up an interesting point, Shaw, that I just kind of want to expound on. Like you brought up some excellent, situations or circumstances in which what we're talking about could be for teams that have been there, like the Milwaukee Bucks, and teams that are just finding their footing, like the Sacramento Kings and like the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I want to make sure I'm parsing this correctly, because what I'm basically alluding to is not so much saying that they have to figure this out from an executional standpoint. The X's and O's are absolutely, and the adjustments that have to be made are absolutely, on the coaches. They have to be a part of that. They are, quote unquote, the quintessential X factors to those things. I'm not dismissing that, taking away from that, and I'm not putting any more or less weight on that aspect of it. I think to the point that I'm talking about, Shaw, is recognizing the ebb and flows of what's right and not right about what's happening. And at times, I think when a team has got it together, when even the players recognize that something isn't right, when another team is either making a run or you're not executing the way that it needs to be, or the way that it's being laid out. Like, you should at this point be all in on what your head coach is asking of you, or the rest of the coaching staff is asking of you at this stage, right? And I'm not talking about the conference. I'm talking about playoffs, period, just in general. Like, y'all are on the same page about these things. It's not about riding emotions, if you're going up or you're going down or whatever. It's about acknowledging whether or not you're doing those necessary things. And to me, part of that is when you've been in this level and you've been doing this for as long as you're doing it, Shaw, you don't need someone to tell you that you're not doing it, right? I just think that, to me, you've gotten to this point. You've brought yourself to this point so that you know that you're doing it, right? So maybe I'm giving too much credit to some of these NBA stars. We can use age, we could use whatever the factors are as a reason to justify it. But what I'm just saying is that you get yourself to this point over and over and over again. And at some point, if we're still questioning the same things about you, then maybe something hasn't changed. And to your point, then the question becomes, well, who are you going to put in there to make them see that differently? Who are you going to implement in there to help them see that completely differently than what seems to be a vicious cycle for them in their inability to be better than what they're giving you or showing you at that moment in time, which is in the playoffs?
Well, the playoffs are where, legends and stars are made. And that's what we all like. We like to hear and see that, these guys step up to the proverbial moment. But as I was saying before, I think it's just sometimes you could be somewhere and not necessarily shrinking into the moment, but if you just don't have the requisite toolbox, and some certain players can only ride when things are high, or overcome adversity, in very, very specific scenarios, like in the most favorable scenarios, but I think what we've seen in this year's playoffs is just the continued scapegoating, of coaches when um, players may and probably did need to be better, but also there's been just as many situations where the coaches just didn't do the requisite job. I think front office management and fans and media need to really need to evaluate what was the makeup of that specific situation, the roster, the team they went against, the circumstance, and who was in, who was out, and did the coach extrapolate every last ounce of talent and effort out of that team that he or she could have?
Let me
And did the players also respond to those, machinations, if you will, in a way that was like, hey, you feel like you left it all on the floor?
let me ask you this. Do you think, and I don't want to, I don't want my question to only be focused on what we're talking about regarding the Celtics and the Heat, but they are part of this. But do you think because teams like matchups like the Nuggets and the Lakers, right, who have seen each other already how many times in the last 3 years? Two times in the last 3 years. Um, the Heat and the Celtics, right? The Bucks and the Heat, right? Like, so the Celtics and the 76ers. I think what I'm asking you, Shaw, is do you think the repetition of seeing these teams playing against the same people that were adjudicating this assessment on, be it coaches or players, whoever you want to call it, the repetition of these matchups has exacerbated and enlightened and even more damning, assessment, has given more credence to, I guess, the feeding frenzy from the social, from the social media outlets, from the sports pundits and things of that nature on why we've come to this point in assessing, the breakdown of coaches, or the quote unquote impotence of coaching in the playoffs, as well as, to my point, I think the impotence of of player
Hmm.
player acceptance, right? Like, player accountability acceptance in this particular aspect.
Again, it's still a subjective conversation because are all the coaches all the same, in that. Now, you take the Denver series and Lakers series, Frank Vogel was a coach and not Darvin Ham, right? But I think it's a matter. It's interesting because if the players remain the same, but the coaches change, then that's just a completely different dynamic. If the teams more or less, even the teams could change, but the coaches now have remained the same, having that level of continuity and being able to kind of see, hey, what did we learn from 2 years ago? Are these tendencies still the same versus not? And that's where I think coaching can really, really get a leg up in a series if they have the ability to have, some stability within their team and organization and implement the styles that they want. And then there can be some for them. It's almost the opposite. I would fully expect the coaches to be able to adjust and have a better game plan once they've seen X team in some various same iteration, if you will, from years ago. And again, each year is different. I understand that, but I expect them to be able to make the adjustments even better than some of the players. And again, I'll use Spoelstra specifically. I think he's locked in now onto kind of like how Boston specifically plays, and like, listen, this is how we can beat these mofo's. They have some new pieces, but the core guys are the same. And now I can implement a plan with what my new roster is and make it very, very difficult for them to be successful. It's different from the coaches, from the players' perspective when it comes over that year and year continuity. And I don't necessarily think the line should be that far off, but the coaches, I feel absolutely need to be better when they see things over year, and a little bit less so for the players.
Well, I think this has been an awesome topic in and of itself. And I think that there's going to be a continuation of this conversation to be had, probably once we find out who actually is going to be advancing in the NBA, to the NBA finals. Because when we do our autopsies, we may have to seriously evaluate, the coaching situation or situations where it may be merited. And at the same time as well, too, apply that to where the player components are and whether or not there truly is a building block between coach and players to assess the future of that team and their organizational success moving forward. So to me, it's a dynamic conversation that definitely still needs to be had, Shaw. But we want to hear from you guys as well too. Like, what are your feelings and thoughts about what you've seen as far as coaching in the playoffs, and how big of an impact do you think it has had, and whether or not it's going to have, like, something for us to chew on when we're talking about these remaining teams, and whether or not it's going to yield not just success to possibly win a championship if they advance or don't advance, but even sustainable success moving forward if we see clearly egregiances that are coming from that level in this high stakes of a situation, which is why they're supposed to be there to begin with, is to win a championship. And if they can't get it done, then how quickly do you start making those moves? So interesting stuff to be had.
Yes, sir, man. Yes, sir.
Anyway, I'll let Shaw, what does Michael K say? I'll let him towel himself off on this one. It's a good one to be had. And as always, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week for the Baseline. Cali, Warren, Shaw, we appreciate you guys. Thanks for hopping on board with us this week, guys. And we'll catch up with you next time.